Hey everyone, it's PH here, and I've been pondering feminism lately. I remember when I was younger, I used to consider myself a feminist, but a little before I went into high school, I noticed a lot of issues with the feminist movement, and that's when I disbanded from it and became what I'd call an anti-feminist. Now, an anti-feminist, as I'm sure you know, is someone who doesn't agree with or identify with the values or practices of the feminist movement, or even super-liberals who just look at it more thoroughly and notice issues with the movement. Let me explain, though, that being an anti-feminist does not inherently make you a sexist or a misogynist. In fact, a great group of people who label themselves anti-feminists strive for egalitarian goals. They believe fully in equality of the sexes, they just don't believe in some of the more specific, more radical things that the feminist movement teaches. Still, when you look up the definition of feminism, it says essentially the belief in the equality of the sexes. Now, there's hardly anything controversial about that. It's only that the feminist movement doesn't always represent those values, but more commonly gives a sort of matriarchal view, that men are the cause of all problems, and especially a sort of sisterhood way of thinking. I've noticed recently that a huge part of feminist rhetoric today includes a bond between feminists that's almost exclusive to women. A sort of we need to stick together as women mentality. A sisterhood. And this is one of the great things I disagree with in feminism. And that's for one, because I'm not a woman, so I don't feel included in that. And two, because I don't believe in shaping a political or philosophical identity or movement based around a gender. If feminism is truly about equality, we shouldn't see so much propaganda about empowerment aimed specifically at women. Now, in a truly egalitarian society, we wouldn't have expectations about how, for instance, a relationship would work. Men wouldn't be expected to be the provider and always pay the bill, and be the big macho guy who lifts the furniture and holds the door open for ladies. And meanwhile, women wouldn't be expected to always be the submissive type, to stay at home and take care of the kids, stay in the kitchen and keep her mouth shut. One of the biggest issues with feminism today is that it's all very one-sided. Men's issues are never explained, and men are always seen as the enemy, the oppressor. As I thought further about this, I did a tiny bit of research online about feminism. Before I talk about that, I'll talk about my view on feminism throughout my life. I used to call myself a feminist when I was younger, because I believe in gender egalitarianism to a point, men and women being equal both in rights and socially. I have never believed in stereotypes or conventional views of gender, and believe it or not, I used to be a big fan of BuzzFeed, a company which I now despise. After noticing some double standards and a lot of bitterness towards men, I stopped watching BuzzFeed because it seemed to be upholding sexist values of its own. However, I was still a feminist for a while, before I started watching The Amazing Atheist, and decided to abandon the term altogether, and instead call myself an anti-feminist. Despite an opposite name, I still stood for the same values that I always had, equality of the sexes and getting rid of traditional gender views. Since then, I've heard a lot of criticism of the third wave of feminism in particular. If you're not familiar, there are said to be 3 waves of feminism, although now 4, I think some sources say. The first one sprung up in the 20s, demanding legal equality for women, specifically voting rights. Now all these feminists really wanted was a voice. Most of them were pretty old-fashioned, socially speaking, so they probably didn't even care about social differences between genders. The second wave came about in the 60s. That one was about women being equal to men socially, and especially in the workplace, where at the time, women usually didn't hold high titles in offices, and would usually be stuck as secretaries or nurses. This movement was more about female empowerment, and giving chances for women to be socially equal to men. The third movement started in the 90s and revolves completely around social norms and social equality. Most of the criticisms you see regularly about feminism are directed towards the third wave, and that makes sense. This is arguably the most recent one, and is entirely about alleged social issues, which hold significantly less merit than legal issues, which at least have grounds. It seems like feminists nowadays have very little to bitch about, so they try to find the most minuscule things possible. This is also sort of known as the don't assume my gender wave of feminism, though there is said to be a fourth wave, which is arguable. However, I would like to mention that none of these waves of feminism stood for particularly matriarchal views. It's just that some of the people in these movements, specifically the third wave, may seem to be radical, man-hating, and disagreeable. Though even third wave feminism presents the value of social equality, which I still very much agree with. Now the third wave in particular may seem to be a bunch of PC man-haters, but the truth is the feminist movement has never really been about men. Yes, feminism is supposed to be egalitarian, but even back in the first and second wave, there was still this sexist idea of sisterhood. Just look at Sojourner Truth, for instance. She was a strong leader of the first wave movement, all the way back in the 1800s, but she still only really represented women. Her rhetoric was made up a lot about her femininity, declaring herself as a woman and separating her from men. Social equality is actually sort of a new idea, and even modern-day feminists don't seem to fully grasp it. However, feminism has still done some good for equality on both sides. Second-wave feminism has been given a lot of credit for being egalitarian. A lot of even anti-feminists are big fans of the second-wave movement. One of the things they advocated for was an ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, to the Constitution. This would have made it unconstitutional to give unequal rights to men and women. Now, despite a lot of the sort of matriarchal feminism we have today, this would have actually stood completely for equality, because this would mean that women could no longer have any legal benefits over men, an argument which I could still see being made today. This was when feminism truly stood for equality, not just superior treatment of women. The opposers in this day, the anti-feminists, were either among conservatives or more matriarchal feminists. No, not men, but women, who didn't want the ERA because this would mean they would have to be drafted for war, among losing other legal benefits given to women. The opposition was led by Phyllis Schlafly, a woman, not because she was a brainwashed misogynist, but because she thought women needed to be protected and cared for, instead of treated as equals. Many feminists still seem to demonstrate the same view. However, despite the good second-wave feminism has done, it was still sort of matriarchal in some senses. They often created men-free zones and advocated specifically women empowerment, which is obviously different than advocating equality. This is why I've started to differentiate between the feminist movement and the ideology of feminism. Just because I'm not a feminist, a social justice warrior on the side of the feminist movement, that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't believe in the core values of feminism. I believe in equality. Whether you believe me or not, as an anti-feminist, I believe in social and political equality of the sexes, more than BuzzFeed feminism has ever seemed to demonstrate. Yes, I believe that there is something of the sort like toxic masculinity, as you feminists would call it, but I also believe very much in toxic femininity as well. I am an impartial person, and if that makes me a feminist, that's fine. If not, I'm okay with that too. Either way, I'm still an anti-feminist.